In this video, I'll be showing you 3 separate PvE builds that just about every player should be using here in Destiny 2. Warlock, Hunter, and Titan will be covered today, so no worries if you're a player that only mains one of them, you will not be left out. If you end up enjoying the video today, feel free to leave a like as well as subscribe and become part of the less than 25% of people that have already done so. My channel is completely dedicated to PvE within Destiny 2, and I'd love to have you around. With that said, let's jump into it. By the way, I don't have a sponsor for today's video, so if you'd like to go the extra mile in supporting the content, 𝗕𝗏𝗔𝗔 is doing a buy one get one free sale on their website, and you can use the link in the description to directly support me if you pick anything up. Thanks guys. Kicking things off with the first build of the video, we start with what I believe is the best Strand Titan build in the game. I've been absolutely glued to this playstyle ever since Bungie unlocked the rest of the Strand subclass, and being able to pair it with the recent Immortal SMG from Trials of Osiris has only strengthened my love for it. This build is centered around 3 core values that make it so strong: crowd control, damage resistance, and ability uptime. Using this build, you'll be able to control mass amounts of enemies at once with next to no effort, which will not only keep enemies from hurting yourself or your allies, but expose said enemies to massive amounts of damage without them being able to fight back. On top of this, you'll be able to juggle a damn near permanent 40% damage resistance buff, which when paired with tier 10 resilience, will turn you into a walking tank at 70% resistance, truly fulfilling your Titan's role as an unstoppable force. Lastly, with the correct aspects, fragments, and mods, your abilities will see recharge rates so damn good, you'd swear you were running pre-nerf Heart of Inmost Light even when you're not. Pair all of this with some of the truly amazing Strand weapons Bungie has given us during the launch of Lightfall, and you're looking at what I consider to be not only the strongest Titan Strand build, but one of the strongest Titan builds overall. The cornerstone of this build comes in the form of the Abayant Leap exotic boots, which you either got from completing the legendary Lightfall campaign or from Legend Lost sectors. This exotic gives us Puppeteer's Control, which buffs the 𝗔𝗗𝗩𝗔𝗡𝗘𝗥 Titan aspect, allowing us to create 3 strand waves after using our class ability, which will surf across the floor and track into enemies, causing them to become suspended when they touch them. Not only this, but after suspending a target, we're granted a 40% damage resistance buff as it automatically applies Woven Mail to our Guardians, so let's build into this. As far as abilities go, we'll be running the Rally Barricade for its lower cooldown, plus the ability to shoot enemies without needing to walk around it, then the jump of your choosing, Frenzied Blade of course, and finally the Shackle Grenade, which we'll build further into in a minute. For the aspects, we of course have the only 2 that we can get right now: Into the Fray, which grants us Woven Mail when destroying a Tangle, and while Woven Mail is active, get increased melee regeneration rate, and the other aspect being Dringer's Lash, which we discussed earlier. For the fragments, we have the Thread of Mind, which will give us class ability energy after killing a suspended target. This feeds right into getting our class ability back as soon as possible, which is what we want. Next, we have the Thread of Transmutation. Weapon Final Blows will create a Tangle while we have Woven Mail. This of course feeds back into the permanent 40% damage resistance, as destroying these tangles that we spawn will just refresh the buff. And next we have the Thread of Generation. Dealing damage generates grenade energy. This will of course feed into the Shackle Grenade, which in turn feeds into getting our class ability back thanks to Thread of Mind. And finally, the last fragment slot is mainly up to the user. If you're running Strand weapons with Hatchling, I highly recommend Thread of Evolution to make them even stronger. Perhaps next season when the artifact perks change, Thread of Propagation will be great since we have constant melee energy, and this can serve as a means to get unraveling rounds consistently. Or finally, you could run Thread of Continuity, which will extend your suspend, unravel, and sever durations, and I personally think that this would be the best to run for content like GMs or Master Raids, for example, where enemies are going to be much harder to kill. But outside of that and in just regular content, I find myself killing every enemy pretty much before they ever drop out of suspension, so I personally don't really run it. With our subclass tweaked to our liking, now let's quickly go over the mod setup. I personally like to match my weapons with my subclass when running builds, so we're going to build around this as though we're running as much Strand as possible. There's 3 things I'm trying to accomplish with this perk composition. First, I want to have a consistent means to make as many orbs as possible. Second, I want my Strand weapons to deal tons of damage. And third, I want to use my abilities to get my other abilities. So let's do just that. Firstly, let's go to the boots and slap some Strand Surge mods on there for extra damage. You can slap as many as you'd like here, but I personally run 2 plus a time dilation on the class item for the longer duration, with another mod slot on the legs being taken up by better already, which is going to heal me when I pick up an orb. I don't ever want to sit out of the fight to regain my health, so any reason for me to never leave and keep on tanking damage is right up my alley. Next, after we have our Strand Surges, let's create a means to make orbs. I do this with 𝗕𝗏𝗔𝗔𝗍𝗏 on the helmet for Strand weapon kills to spawn orbs, and I also have the Reaper mod on my class item, which will give me an orb after I get a kill whenever I pop my class ability. As for the rest of the mods, I mainly focus on ability regen and resist, with my helmet having Dynamo for super energy on class ability usage. I also have powerful friends there because nothing else really is going to fit. Next on the gauntlets, I just focus on ability regen with bolstering detonation, momentum transfer, and focusing strike. TLDR, I get class ability regen when causing damage with both my melee and grenade, as well as melee cooldown reduction on grenade damage as well. Lastly, I have some resist on the chest piece with charged up to let me keep my Strand damage boost even longer with another armor charge, and finally I have bomber on my class item for grenade recharge when using my class ability. All in all, this results in a build that takes ability spam to a whole nother level and allows you to CC nearly every target in your path while also getting ungodly amounts of heals and damage resistance on top of amazing weapon damage in between those ability uses. Of course, this build can be beefed up even further with some of the artifact perks, specifically 𝗕𝗘𝗠𝗇𝗥, Allied Unraveling, and Threaded Blast, but none of these are remotely needed for this build to feel as strong as it does. If you plan on running this build, I highly recommend using the following weapons. The Immortal. It has great versatility as an SMG, proving to be amazing up close and decent at medium range due to its archetype, and it also has some great perks to back it up. Michael's Reverence. It complements this build perfectly as an up close and personal weapon type that's also going to be getting a 20% damage buff in the near future. It rolls Unrelenting and Pugilist in the first column, which complements further survivability or ability regen, and also gets fantastic damage perks in the second column too. Rufus's Fury. This weapon rolls Demo or Pugilist in the first column for ability regen, plus has great damage perks in the second column, and just like the sidearm before it, we'll be seeing a sizable damage buff soon, although for this weapon it's a 25% boost, which sounds very enticing. And finally, we have Circular Logic, a fantastic machine gun and an excellent archetype, which I love to use for all things Strand. It has good perks, but the downside of it is not being craftable. For those that have it though, I highly recommend it. So Titans, if you didn't already know about this build, I hope you're happy with now becoming literal walking tanks with unlimited crowd control capabilities. Now let's move on over to the Sunbracer's Warlock build. It's no secret that Bungie is going to be nerfing the Starfire protocol sometime soon. It's just stayed way too dominant for way too long, and because of this, an old exotic that's truthfully always been really good is starting to shine even more, and that exotic is the Sunbracers. So what can you expect to accomplish using this build? Well, I'm glad you asked. The 3 core pillars of this build will be constant healing, endless grenades, and unlimited buff timers. When using this build, you'll be able to take flight into the air as an angel of death and throw as many grenades as your heart desires. These grenades will have increased linger durations, spew lava towards enemies, refresh any damage or healing buff timers you have when getting kills, and also give you an absurd amount of super energy to boot. And remember, you have unlimited of these grenades, which you can earn at just the snap of a finger. See what I did there? Anyways, enough talking about what this build can do. Let's get you into the action as quickly as possible and explain how everything works, starting with the exotic and the subclass. Firstly, we have the Sunbracers. This exotic gives you the Helium Spirals perk, which states that our solar grenades will have an increase in duration, and that solar melee kills will grant us unlimited solar grenade energy for a brief time. So let's build into this. Starting with our super, I opt for Well of Radiance because it's literally the best super in the game, no need not to. Then for the class ability, we have Phoenix Dive, which will help us with our survivability and be fairly useful considering we'll be airborne for much of our gameplay loop. Next is the glide of your choosing, but again, it will be in the air quite a bit, so strafe is a pretty safe bet. Then for our melee, we're going to be running the incinerator snap, which is going to deal good damage, hit enemies in a cone pattern, and also has a quick cooldown, with our final ability being solar grenades. For our aspects, we're running touch of flame, which is going to buff our solar grenades with even more duration, as well as the overall damage that they can do. And for our second aspect, we have heat rises, which is going to allow us to shoot and use abilities all while gliding in the air, which this can be refreshed when getting kills while airborne. And the reason we take this aspect is for the melee energy that we also get when getting those kills that is going to directly feed into sunbracers. Moving on to fragments, we have Ember of Empyrean, which states that solar weapon kills or ability kills will extend the duration of restoration or radiant buffs. This will greatly synergize with the restoration that we get from Phoenix Dive and will ensure our survivability given we're an easy target up in the air. Next, I have Ember of Searing, which will allow our grenades to give us melee energy on kills since they scorch targets before killing them, and this fragment also spawns fire sprites, which when picked up will give us grenade energy if need be. Next is Ember of Ashes, which allows us to apply more Scorch stacks, which is just a general buff to our melee and grenades, allowing them to deal more damage overall by a pretty large margin. And lastly, just like the Titan build, we have a fragment that can be swapped around to a few different ones if you'd like, but I personally run Ember of Resolve, which will allow our grenades to cure us on final blows, which is essentially just a sudden burst of healing, which is also going to be alongside the restoration buff that we get. I noticed that in higher end content like the legendary campaign, for example, enemies are going to hit much harder and your health is going to be in a bit of a tougher spot, and it's kind of nice to have an extra layer of safety just in case. Now, moving on over to the mods, I have yet again 3 things I want to accomplish here. First, I want my supers to come back at record-setting speeds. Second, I want to lean into melee ability regen, since that is the core ability that enables this build to do what it does. And third, I want my weapons to output some serious firepower. I don't really have anything too crazy here. For orb generation, I'm rocking a siphon on my helmet and firepower on my gauntlets. For ability regen, I of course have dual ashes to assets on my helmet, which is going to cause my super bar to fill near instantaneously. I also have dual momentum transfers, which is going to give me more melee energy when causing grenade damage, as well as dual outreach, which again targets melee energy because without our melee, we can't get the build rolling. I occasionally mess up my melee ability by missing it or not quite getting a kill, so it's always nice to be able to get it back quickly if need be. Lastly, I have dual solar surges for weapon damage with time dilation and charged up to extend the buff timer, with some resist mods on the chest as well. All in all, this build shapes up to be what's absolutely going to dethrone Starfire once it gets its nerf. Even in the current sandbox, I'd use this build over Starfire in 100% of scenarios that don't include raid boss damage, as it's just that good, and more importantly, a lot more fun to use. Taking flight to rain down fire and lava on your enemies while also receiving unlimited heals and buff timers is something that I can't hype up enough. If you've never given this build a whirl, make sure you do so ASAP. Also, if you do decide to do so, I highly recommend running a weapon that can scorch enemies to fully lean into the synergy with your fragments. Anything with incandescent will do, but I'd highly recommend the Drang above all else, since it can roll with Wellspring for helping out with your abilities. The Callus mini tool is great too, or if you're looking for weapons that are currently obtainable, the BXR is great for incandescent plus ability regen because it gets Debo or Pugilist, and the Sunshot exotic is going to be absolutely fantastic for this build, especially with the hand cannon buff dropping soon. Now, for the final build of the video, I'll be putting you guys into the boots of Batman and giving you a playstyle that allows you to attack enemies from the shadows and retreating back for another strike without them ever even knowing you're there. This build comes in the form of utilizing the Assassin's Cowl, and with the proper aspects, fragments, and mods, here are the 3 key things that you can come to expect when utilizing this build. Survivability via invisibility, becoming One Punch Man himself, and also supers/grenades galore. Utilizing Assassin's Cowl alongside a properly tuned arc subclass, we can all but guarantee that most of our enemies will die in 1 to 2 punches. Because powered melee final blows grant invisibility and heals, we'll be leaving invisibility for a punch, instantly killing our target, and instantly re-entering invisibility before moving on to the next enemy. To pull this off and to truly become One Punch Man, we simply pair our fist with the right ability, aspect, and fragment to deal incredibly high damage with all of our punches to guarantee that any enemy we attack won't live to tell the tale. And just in case, we also can use a 1-2 punch shotgun to our advantage whenever we're fighting those really beefy targets such as champions. Finally, we'll have some very high super and grenade regen via the mods that we utilize, which can result in some very shocking results on just how fast you can get these back compared to other classes. Enough hyping up the build though, let's talk about how it works. Starting with Assassin's Cowl, this exotic states that powered melee final blows grant invisibility and restore our health and shields. Also, final blows against more powerful enemies will give us more health as well as longer invisibility duration. This sounds great and all, but the exotic isn't all that good if we can't guarantee high damaging punches, so let's delve into our subclass and make that happen. Firstly, the super we want is going to be Gathering Storm. This is one of the strongest supers in the game for general damage, and it won't take us out of our core gameplay loop as it's not a roaming super. Next, we're going to equip the Gambler's Dodge to regenerate our melee ability, which this build hinges on, and then equip the Combination Blow melee ability, which will instantly refund said dodge after a kill. It also gives a buff that can stack up to 3 times and gives more damage per stack. For our grenade, you can use either Pulse or Storm Grenade, as this is truly going to be up to preference, so pick what you like. Moving on to the aspects, we have Lethal Current. This states that after we dodge, our next melee will have better lunge range and will also jolt the target, with an aftershock of damage occurring afterwards. This aftershock also causes nearby enemies to get blinded, and combining this aspect with 3 stacks of Combination Blow is going to be a sight to behold. Our other aspect is much less important, but it's called Flow State and says that defeating a jolted target will make us amplified. Truly, we're just kind of using this one for more fragment slots. Speaking of fragment slots, our first fragment will be Spark of Feedback, which will increase our damage by I believe 75% if we in turn get hit by a melee attack from an enemy. It also is going to give us 10 extra resilience, which is always great. Next, we have the Spark of Resistance, which will increase our survivability by giving us damage resist when around enemies, which honestly should be all the time. And for our last 2 fragments, we're going to spec into beefing up our grenade ability via Magnitude for extended duration, and Shock, which will give them the ability to jolt. These alongside our super will be great to use on enemies, alongside all the punches that we'll be dishing out. Now, moving on over to the mods, as you've come to expect, here are the 3 things that we're working to improve here. Off the charts 𝗿𝗏𝗡 generation, lightning fast super and grenade recharge rate, and added resistance to ensure our survival. When we throw together these last pieces of the puzzle, we'll have by far one of the best builds in Destiny 2 right now for the Hunter, so let's take a look. To give ourselves a top tier orb generation, I'll be using a singular mod in the form of Heavy Handed, which creates orbs based off of powered melee final blows, which is literally something we have unlimited of thanks to our dodge. And due to our melee also refunding our dodge to us, that means we have unlimited dodges too. So we can use this to our advantage by utilizing Dynamo on the helmet, which will give us super energy on our dodge, and we can use hands-on here as well for super energy on melee kills. I also have mods specifically for our grenade. Since our dodge and melee kind of feed into each other, we gotta pick up our grenade just a little bit. So I have Innervation for grenade energy on orb pickup, with 3 bomber mods on the class item for energy on class ability usage, and we have Ashes to Assets on the helmet, yet again feeding into super energy. Lastly, I have some resist mods on the chest with emergency reinforcement as well, which will give us damage reduction once our shields break, and it will utilize an armor charge. But this is simply a worst case scenario type use and won't be utilized all that much. Lastly, you may have noticed that I have some surge mods present on this build as well. You could probably replace these with more ability-centric mods, but I run these because while running this build, those mods boost my 1-2 punch shotgun when fighting beefier enemies, and it also boosts the explosive light GL that I like to use for when I face a boss type enemy or champion that I want to get rid of from a distance. So once you have all of this put together, you're going to have yourself a playstyle that looks something like this. punch and kill an enemy to go invisible, and dodge afterwards near another enemy to get your melee charge back, then punch again. Do this on a few more enemies to build up your combination blow stacks, and once they're at 3 times, you can continue to refresh them by getting more kills, and now that they're at max stacks, also focus on the beefier targets like mages or champions. You can even shoot these enemies with 1-2 punch, which will boost your damage by 100% for whenever you go in to kill them with your punch, and you just keep repeating this cycle while also throwing nades and supers where you see fit before re-entering invis with another punch. And by the way, I did see some discussion around the topic of 1-2 punch recently that apparently you only get a 40% damage increase to your punch, but this isn't true, and I even tested it myself and compared the numbers to make sure, so I would highly recommend running a 1-2 punch shotgun as the damage is indeed very nice. Speaking of which, pretty much any 1-2 punch shotgun can work, as the other perks don't really need to be all that great as long as you have that specific one. I personally use 𝗕𝗘𝗘𝗏, which has 1-2 punch and field prep, which I find nice for the extra reserve ammo. I do highly recommend running double special weapons with this setup as well, as we all know that double special does increase your heavy ammo drops, and with this build it really makes no sense to run a primary weapon anyways. I recommend running 𝗕𝗏𝗱𝗏, a chill clip fusion for champions, or a blinding GL in the kinetic slot, with your shotgun in the energy slot, with some kind of boss damaging weapon or eager sword in your heavy. When all of that is put together on this build, you're rocking one of the most deadly playstyles any Guardian can run inside Destiny 2 PvE. And that, my friends, is gonna do it for me today. I don't make build videos often, so I hope you all enjoyed what is pretty much a rarity for me as far as uploads go. Thank you all so much for watching all the way to the end, and if any of you would like to try these builds out for yourselves, you can easily copy them to your Guardians using the dim links in the description. You also may have noticed that this video was edited a little bit differently than my other ones, and that is because, thanks to all of you guys and your endless support, not only am I talking through a completely brand new microphone right now, but I also have a brand new editing software, which is allowing me to do a little bit more with my content, so I definitely appreciate all of you guys that watch the content and help support me. And speaking of supporting, I gotta give a shout out to my Patreon supporters and tier 2 YouTube members before we wrap things up. For Patreon, we have 𝗏𝗛𝗏𝗏, Vile, John, Serenity, and Boomernoob in tier 2, with Austin, 𝗁𝗂, and Gloomy in tier 3, as well as my tier 2 YouTube members being Bluesman, Clear, Imposter, Angel, Ben McClellan, Hank the Tank, Mayhem Gaming, Nibble Fox, Mamimi, Peak, and Serenity once more. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.